to our final discussion in this year as elders. Over the past 3 sessions, we have been looking at Elam's history, vision, and DNA. We then looked at our Pentecostal distinctive and what it is that sets us apart. And in the last session, we were looking at how we create a Pentecostal culture and how we develop our churches so that we don't lose the DNA that we have. And so in this 4th and final video, we're looking a bit more at our own personal leadership as elders. And we're going to explore 3 main areas. One is, how do you keep your passion? Second is, how do you keep your sanity? And then how do we keep qualified? And today you will know these faces because they have hosted some of our previous conversations. We have Mike Nichols from Luton, and we have Lee Carmichael from Ingatstone. And so I'm just going to jump into the conversation with them and begin to explore some of our own personal leadership. And so we're going to start by looking at our passion. And leadership requires us to be passionate about leading people and leading God's church and loving people. But the reality is, as we try and pour ourselves out in love and in service to people, it can kill our passion a little bit. So, Mike, maybe you want to start by talking about your own experience and how you keep your passion alive.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I think it's a massive question, isn't it? And I think it's fairly easy to answer in my season at the moment because I'm only about 2.5 years into my context. I think it'd be very different if I've been here 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. So it's fairly easy at the minute locally to keep my passion. But for leadership, just in the time I've been an Elim minister, which is about coming on to 11 years now, how I've kept my passion. It sounds so simple, but really keeping the main thing. As pastors, as elders, as people on staff teams and leading in any church context, it's so easy to default in just doing, fulfilling the function, whether that's a rota, whether it's an elders meeting, and making sure that everything we do, the main thing is kept the main thing. And practically, I think it can be done really simply, keeping a prayerful mindset in everything we do, putting Jesus first, seeing everything as an act of worship, like Romans 12:1 says. It's not just singing. Everything we do as output as leaders is worship. And a massive one for me, I think, is, and I'm still classed as a young leader, I'm 33, but keeping younger people around me. And I think totally now in our 21st century mindset and context, the gap between a 33-year-old and a 20-year-old is bigger than it's ever been before. Technology, social media, the rate things are moving. Just keeping younger people around you, even if it's 5-10 years younger, and that's not just on staff team or elder team, but in the church, listening to the younger voices, I think keeps you passionate because particularly people in their late teens, early 20s see the world completely differently. And having that attitude, that mindset, that perspective keeps me passionate.
Excellent. Cheers, Mike. Lee, do you want to share with us anything that you use to keep you as well?
Yeah, I was thinking about the question when you sent it, and I suppose I would flip the question and go, what destroys your passion? You know, or what takes it out? And I think one of the quotes that's really stuck in my head through my mentoring this year is one of the quotes that came up was Eugene Peterson. Don't ask me where he said it, but it's, you know, did you sign up to run a church, or did you sign up to be a pastor? And you know, I think one of the biggest passion destroyers, isn't it, is just running a church sometimes as elders, as church leaders. You know, the burden of ticking boxes, of all of the stuff that we have to do in order to, you know, not just meet regulations. It's more than that. You know, safeguarding is a passion of mine, but it's equally just, it feels like it's another thing that we've got to do. Health and safety, you know, finances, all of those things. And I think sometimes for me, it is not only knowing that we do have to do those things. What Mike said is the why. You know, why are we doing those things? It's kingdom, it's serving, it's God honoring in those things. So it's keeping that perspective. But equally, it is, you know, the main thing is what you're called to do. And we've been talking today about those 5-fold things. You know, apostles, prophets, evangelists, teachers, pastors. You know, I'm first and foremost, for me, my major thing is teaching, and that is a passion for me. It's not losing sight of what you're called to do, whilst needing to run the house at the same time. So as elders in particular, I think it's easy for business meetings to run away. One of the things we do at the beginning of our leadership meetings is it's more than just have one person bring 5 minutes of devotion. We actually almost have our own little Bible study sometimes, and then we can overrun because we get passionate about what we're talking about, discovering some truth out of the scripture, and that for me is just draws us back to why we're there. It is about our relationship with God. It's about leading His church, not just running a building in that sense as well.
Excellent. One of the things I just listening in and wanting to dig in a little bit, it's something you just said, Lee, is about knowing what you do. And I think in leadership, there's this balance we have to strike. There are some things we just got to do. We all have to be just willing to do them, serve. And there are things like in any job, there are jobs that you just have to get on with, and nobody really wants to do them, but they need to get done. And at the same time, not waste too much time so that we can do the things we're really gifted in and do the things that we know we carry a passion for, without it sounding arrogant or boastful that we're maybe better at than other people. And it's part of it is trying to strike that balance between doing what's needed because everybody just needs to serve, and doing what I'm gifted at. And do either of you have any reflections on how you strike that balance well?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's massive. What you said, Lee and Jamie. I think a revelation I had a few years into ministry, particularly when I was leading teams and things, is I would want to do everything. And I think actually ministry philosophy has changed, certainly since I've been in ministries. And I look at people who are older than me, where the pastor would sacrifice everything on the altar of ministry, including their family sometimes. They'd do everything and be everything. And that's changed, I think, certainly in Ealing, where we're far more willing to take a collaborative approach with other pastors and with lay leaders as well. So the revelation I had was the things that I did because I thought I had to do, but I didn't like doing. I realized the things I didn't like doing, other people enjoyed doing, but I had said they're no for them because I don't like doing it. I assume they don't like doing it. Like Lee said about the, apostles, prophets, evangelists, teachers, shepherds. We're not all gifted in all five. We probably touch on all five, but we have a propensity towards one or two. And the things we don't like doing, we so often do, and we do begrudgingly and think, oh, no one else will want to do it. But there's people who are really gifted, where I'm not, in administration. I love looking at spreadsheets and love doing all that stuff, love doing finances. It's the bane of my life. And the revelation that somebody actually enjoys doing that was a huge relief to me, because it released me to do what I'm passionate about, which is what you were saying, Jamie.
Yeah, I suppose, I'm not sure I've got much to add to that, really. I think it is seeing it, wider than the service in the church, that actually there is a front line for all of us, even as ministers, even though, our front line is church predominantly, where we spend most of our week and time. But, we actually have a front line of our family, like you say, Mike. It's just, we're passionate about raising our kids or being a good spouse, in that sense, loving our wives, as Christ loves the church. And for our elders, who will, most of whom, nearly all of whom will have a front line in their workplace or whatever else, or that there's something that they're doing, that's in their life beyond church. It's seeing that as equally valid in the outworking of the ministry to which Christ calls us. So it's definitely seeing a life outside of church, but that is kingdom still in what you're doing as well.
Excellent, great. Well, I guess building on that, so we want to keep our passion and keep our love alive and stay passionate for the duration, however long we are elders, however long we are pastors. All of us will have that season draw to a close at some point. We still want to be, passionate believers who will retire and, continue serving God in whatever capacity that is. And so we don't want to burn out our passion, but equally we want to keep our sanity And I think that the last 2 years particularly have been costly. And I know there's been moments in that where it felt a bit like Groundhog Day, and the passion was just oozing out. Oozing out's the wrong word, ebbing away, because it just felt like never-ending monotony. But the reality is, as we lead church, there will be costly seasons and difficult seasons, and seasons either of misunderstanding of stuff that's happening in church, or seasons of conflict because of stuff within the church. And as much as we all want the blessing and the great times, the reality is all of us will have to walk through those seasons. And so in your ministry journeys, how have you both kept your sanity as well as kept your passion, kept that sense of this is going to be okay, and enabled yourself to get through it, I guess, with good mental health and just not losing your sanity in the midst of the hardship? Either of you can jump in.
Yeah, I think straight away the verse that comes to mind for me is a life verse to me, Proverbs 13:20. If you walk with the wise, you'll become wise. A companion of fools suffers harm. And I think the people we have around us are massive. And we see not just with pastors, but with lay leaders as well, those who often fall morally or ethically, they're often isolated and by themselves. So having people around me, like Jamie, I can't use a friend, and we have banter and a laugh, but we can also talk on a level as well, theologically, talk about ministry, about our churches. And we do that with a few other pastors as well. And I think having people in church you can do that with as well. And it always seemed when I was growing up that the pastor, it was thought that the pastor shouldn't have friends in church. And we were almost encouraged not to have friends in church because these are the people we lead. And I saw that sort of crumpled up and thrown away with my home church pastor back in Birmingham, who had really deep relationships with people in church. And I just thought that was so healthy. And so often pastors, leaders, elders, people who are leading other people isolate themselves from the people. But actually, although we're shepherding the flock, we're also under shepherds, under the shepherd, Jesus. And I think having those people around you keep you sane, people you can bounce things off, what you're struggling with, what you're happy with, what you're sad about. It's so, so important to surround yourself with good people.
Yeah, I'd really echo that. I made a note on a similar sort of vein, and for me, as much as I want to move on from the last 2 years, one of the things that got me through it was my elder. He was the guy who, just invited me round for when rules allowed for just either a barbecue, just a chat in the garden, or whatever else it was. And it was just that opportunity to, just to be around someone, but also to know that they understood, what you're going through. And elders have that huge, possibility of seeing certainly their pastor through those tough times. But actually, he serves in a different capacity, in that sense that he serves as a realistic reflection for me as well, that we have a good relationship. And I think, as much as I would say it's about the challenging times to get through, keeping your sanity in those, I think keeping your sanity in positive times as well, when we can become full of ourselves for what's going well. That suddenly when it's going well, we do the same thing as perhaps other people do with God. We don't rely upon that sanity check, that humility check, that sober check from somebody else who can speak into our lives and say, when we're getting too ahead of ourselves, when we're getting too big-headed, too ambitious, or whatever else. And I certainly find keeping my sanity in both ways, so that we walk a middle ground more often than we do the high and the low, in that sense.
Yeah, I think having people who can really share those honest things with us is so important. And I read a tweet, I think it was last week, and I've been reflecting on it since. The tweet went something like this: in the church today, we talk loads about accountability groups, one-to-one relationships, coaching, mentors, counselors, and we used to just call that friends. And I was reflecting on it with Jesus saying, I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends. And actually, all of that language helps to explain different things, but actually maybe we just need more friends. And actually some of this sanity stuff, it's about just being friends with one another. There is professional stuff, but when we're in church, we're not there as professional relationships. When we're in leadership, we are wanting to befriend those who are in our congregation. And I know, leading Crawley, I've got really good friendships with our elders and really good friendships with people in the church. And I wouldn't share everything I share with the elders with people in the church, but that doesn't mean the friendship's any less, or I can't say I'm having a really rough time. I can't go into everything, but it's just really tough. And actually, maybe some of those other languages, which sound really professional, if we just got back to the language of friendship, things might be a bit easier. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think I've always struggled with the friendship thing in church. Really, there's. I think I've always, from the pastor point of view, I've always found it just that there's still sometimes that sense in which, when we go away to the men's camp around the campfire at night, you got a beer in hand or whatever else. You're still the pastor. There's still just that slight divide, isn't there? But I do think, and I actually think that quality of friendship, we said before, isn't it? Jesus was the Son of God, but he was not only able to disciple 12 people, that's what he chose to do. And that was, and discipling, those really well. And we can't have 50 deep friendships with everyone, can we? And I think having those few around and stuff. And I think the note that I just made in there is, don't let a season, be it a difficult or a prosperous season, define your journey. And it was that sense of that sanity is about, the low season, the valley moment in the season is not defining your whole journey, but neither is the success. For our size church, we've added what feels to us like a load of people in the last 10 months. We've added like 25 new people, which is, in my history, 18 years in Elam, never seen that in my own church life. But I need to have a loose hand on that season to know that it's that isn't defining my ministry, and it's growth is fickle, and but it's also not about my success. It's simply about where we're at in the journey with God at the moment. That keeps my sanity from being big-headed or downhearted on those different times.
I think to add to that as well, just to be really mindful, particularly for lay leaders, and I think on my own elders in this, I've got 3 who are working full time, 1 who's retired, and the guy who's retired seems busier now than I think he was when he was working. He does all sort of lectures around the world and things. There's a massive shift, I think, in Christendom towards rediscovering the Sabbath. And what I found is nearly all of us in leadership, whether that be ministerial or lay leadership, can tell you exactly what the Sabbath is, but a very, very small percentage actually live it. I think we have all the intention in the world, but very few of us action it. And it's something I'm struggling with and desperately trying to get a hold of, to keep a proper Sabbath. But it starts with being intentional with your diary and making that priority above all. And I think if we are hoping to have a ministry that is full of sanity, we need to also have a ministry that's full of regulated and repeated rest.
Excellent. That was great, Mike. I want to push us into the third part, which is kind of staying qualified. So in 1 Timothy 3 and in Titus 1, Paul kind of gives us the outline qualifications for leadership, and not academic ones, but ones based on our spiritual maturity. And so he dives into home life and the way we are with our partner and with our kids, with our husband, wife, and with our kids. He talks about our own character and the character that we should have, not being quick-tempered, for instance, not drinking too much wine, those sort of things. And also our spiritual maturity, that we don't kind of get really big-headed and fall under the same condemnation as the devil. And so it kind of breaks into those 3 areas of our home life, our character, and our maturity. And I don't think those qualifications are just qualifications you meet to become an elder. They're qualifications you have to keep and grow into, maintain your place as a leader in the Church of God. And And so I guess in one sense, we're all keeping those, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. But is there anything particularly that you are mindful of, or ways that you endeavor to stay qualified and measure some of your growth in any of those things?
I think, yeah, it's picking up on, I suppose, let's start with the spiritual maturity. Is, I'm, severely conscious of the lack of reading that Christians are doing in churches, full stop. And I don't know, certainly hopefully it doesn't apply to the pastors around in our network, but does it apply to lay leaders? And I'd be aware that I've probably got people on my leadership team who read more and read less, and but we certainly have stepped away. Even we can. Just to say that Christian bookshops are closed doesn't mean say people aren't buying Christian books and reading those things, but just that desire to further your faith through independent learning, because I think that we do have a platform first kind of mentality now, where we suck our spiritual information and download from the platform rather than, going on our own learning journey, by reading that sort of stuff. So yeah, I just would challenge, any lay leader in particular, any pastor, what was the last Christian book you read, and what impact did it have on you? What are you doing to it's more than just that daily devotional. It is a intentional journey towards, deeper relationship and discipleship with God, really.
Can I play devil's advocate and come at complete opposite side of things? Like Lee, I'm a big reader. Love reading, particularly Christian books. In fact, I was part of Lee's book group in Ealing for a number of weeks. We read through a book together. I also think, and I've been challenged on this point by reading a book called Invisible Divides. It only came out April 2022. It's recommended by one of our pastors called Nigel Tween, and it's all about the working class. And when we look for leaders and lay leaders, and I know a number of our churches at the minute, our elders are looking to appoint new elders, we do always look for the academically qualified. But actually, when we look at scripture, there's no sort of degrees, there's no reading ability. It's about being blameless and being faithful to your wife, being prayerful. And I think we also need to be really mindful of the people in our churches who maybe aren't very academically gifted and don't have propensity towards that, but who are just really good Christians. And I think so often, even as we look around Christendom today, obviously not in Ealing, but we see pastors who can preach a great sermon, but we think, goodness me, you read something about them or you see something come out, you think, well, they're really a Christian. So looking, I think, at the qualification of elders as well is, are we doing the basics well in terms of, are we loving our wife, are we arguing? I think a massive thing in the church at the moment, and you see this with all the scandals in the mega churches, is authenticity. I know Lee a little bit, I know Jamie a bit better. But what I can say about both of you is you are dead authentic. You are what you see on the tin. And I think that goes the same for our elders. And I think when we get appointed to a place of leadership with a title and people look at you a bit differently in church, you will suffer with imposter syndrome. It may go to your head a little bit. So just really keep your feet on the ground and remember, like we said in point one, keep the main thing the main thing. We're doing this because we serve, we're doing this because we love, and that should be fueled in our marriage, at home, in our relationships, and like you said, Lee, as well, making sure we're furthering our understanding. I know for me, when I was training for Ealing ministry and looking to Ealing ministry, like ordination was the goal, it was the ceiling. And then when you get there, you get your title, you get given your certificate, you become a reverend. It's almost like an anticlimax because nothing changes. There's no massive party in heaven. There might be a Facebook status here and a couple of likes, but really that's where your ministry begins, when you get the title, whether that be reverend or pastor or elder or deacon. And it's then that the hard graft begins. Just like you've heard the adage, you don't learn to drive until you pass a test. It's exactly the same with appointment and a title as well. So do the basic things well. Love your wife, be careful with alcohol, don't be quick-tempered, keep your feet on the ground. I think it's Romans 12:3, it says, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to. Keep yourself humble.
Yeah, I think all of those are really important. And obviously, Paul has a lot to say about the home And in places like Ephesians 5, he spends a lot of time saying this is what it looks like to be a Christian in the home. And we want elders to reflect that, and we want them to demonstrate that and to be an example of that, of living Christian maturity. And one of the things I've been struck by, particularly with some of the recent scandals, and I'm not sure if I've ever heard a sermon focusing on this part of the qualifications when Paul says, not to be an excessive drinker, not a bully, but gentle, not quarrelsome, and not greedy. And I've heard loads focused on about the home and sexual purity and keeping yourself right, and if your marriage is in trouble, to get help and all of those things. But not being a bully, but being gentle means we've all got to carry those marks of not forcing our own way through, not being domineering, not always having our point of view as the final one, not being quarrelsome, that we're not people out to just to start arguments for argument's sake. And they're actually really important parts, because when I've seen some of the scandals of leadership, this has been part of it. There's been particularly the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast, and reading it in light of that, it's like actually it's more than just those things of having a good family, which most middle class people will want to go. So going back to the working class thing, it's middle class goal, having a good family, good kids, having good education, all of that. But actually it's those much more profound things, not being a bully and not being quarrelsome. And if we find ourselves in those places, actually that is a major problem, because that's not how Jesus acts, and that's not a fruit of the Spirit. And they've been really impressed on me. There's, particularly listening to some of the podcasts I've listened to, so actually we need to be really careful as this on leaders, because this is God's church. Anything else people want to add on that?
Yeah, I agree. Mike, I absolutely take that point, and stand a little bit corrected. I think if I would then widen it just to ensure that you are deepening that relationship, through whatever means, I suppose. Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, I think, yeah, the gentleness thing is that, and I think interestingly, whether or not there's a further conversation, I think sometimes what has prevented or what has enabled these situations to go on with the bullying issue, with the with those unhealthy cultures, is the lack, the feeling of a lack of response if anybody was to raise any of those issues, in churches. And I think, coming from our regional point of view, Elam point of view, is, would we feel listened to if we wanted to raise that concern at any time, let alone our own conduct? But it's hearing those stories about our own ministers potentially stepping into that aggressive line of leadership where it's not necessary, and it's how that can make people feel, and how is that challenged or responded. I would just want to encourage any elders that are sort of in this discussion tonight to work out in their own church, those roots of challenge, to that kind of behavior, to that kind of attitude towards one another as lay leaders, but also, towards their minister, and also to be able to approach somebody regionally when there's a concern that is brewing in that sense as well.
I think that's massively. It's such a grey area, isn't it? Like the permission thing, because you feel like often when you're confronted with these things, whether it's between pastors and elders or different elders or people in the church, it's people you generally are doing life with. It's not someone outside who you don't know. So I guess you can almost feel like you're doing the dirty on someone. But as an elder, as a pastor, that's what we're charged to do, is to protect the sheep, to protect the flock, and to protect each other. So there's been so much come out, I think, which has been so disheartening for the church. And as always, the media about the church is generally bad. So it's so good, I think, to be in Elim with our structures, our safeguarding structures in terms of regional leaders and national leaders, that everybody is accountable. I think over all the 3 points, accountability is so important, but it will only ever be as effective as we allow it to be.
Excellent. Well, to round this up, do either of you kind of have one, it might be nothing we've discussed so far, but one more thing, if you could say one more thing to our elders about their own personal development. I haven't prepped you for this, so it might just go silent at this point. But if there was one more thing you would want to say and just pass on as a nugget of wisdom that you have learned in your own leadership, what would it be?
I think this might sound a bit brown nosy, but how important the pastors are, and Lee's already hinted at this, how important elders are to the pastor. I know for me, in my context, the elders that I have are the people who've kept me sane, they've supported me, they've seen me through really tough decisions, they've been there in the good times and the bad. So don't think what you're doing is just a formality or a tick box. It really does matter, and it helps keep the church alive and healthy and safe. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think we have, and I used in the vain attempt of being contemporary and up to date. I used to sort of, try and work away from that traditional biblical view of deacons and elders. But actually, I think it still applies today really well. And I think the larger the church gets, you end up getting church boards and that sort of stuff. And I feel, certainly if there are churches which have run away from that kind of model, that really let's start to draw it back in, because the elders aren't just simply there to teach. They are, and I think that's really, there's a powerful, element to that. But I think that accountability, that relationship, that holistic team leadership of a church that sees the spiritual direction through, elders, that is your role. That is where God has called you to be. So don't take it lightly, and whatever you do, it is about that. It's not about getting a big head, but it is about seeing your role in the life of that church. And what God has placed you in, He will use you significantly with there as well. So, keep that desire for spiritual development, and see the value of your input into your church life. And I really feel that God has placed you there for a reason, and for leading His church alongside your pastor there as well.
Excellent. I think just to tie it up, I think that whole thing we talked about on friendship, I think I'd really want to encourage us across leadership teams not to see it in a professional capacity, but that we are brothers and sisters together who are charged to help shepherd and lead God's church. And friendship is the best setting to do that in. And so let's make every effort. Let's have our business meetings, but let's have those other times where we can eat together and have fun together, and have banter with one another, and let some of that be seen as well. One of the things I know for us, with our elders, we have lots of banter, including on a Sunday morning, and it's fun and it's jovial, and part of that, and it's not put on, but part of it just shows that kind of relationship that we want to have with one another as well, that is full of fun and friendship. And also, just to echo what Mike said, elders, thank you for your serving, thank you for giving your time, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your example, thank you for all that you're doing to see the church mature and taught, and disciples made, and the lost reached, and living full of the Spirit, and all the things that we have talked about. Let me give you a couple of announcements. Wouldn't be something to do with church without announcements. So the Zoom will be on Monday, the 11th of July at 7:45. And we will just do a quick recap on some of the stuff we have talked about. And then we're going to break into rooms and just have some of that discussion around our passion, our sanity, and staying qualified. And we'll dig into that a little bit further with one another, cross-pollinating, learning from one another, and actually, hopefully, over the course of these, finding friends across the movement as well. And then coming into September, we're really excited to announce that Carl Johnson is pioneering some learning communities in our two regions. And these learning communities are for us as churches to gather together and to learn as a team, and learn from one another, and learn from the context that we're in. So it's not going to be like a normal conference where you go and you just spend all the time listening. There'll be snippets of teaching, and we go away with a bunch of questions, and we spend time in a room talking about them and working them through. And so we really want to encourage you into learning communities. And so if you haven't heard about them yet, I can encourage you to talk to your pastor and just get your church involved in these learning communities. I think from memory, it's about £125 for the year or something like that. But there's a video that's going to play when I finish speaking, and Carl will give an update on that. And so for us as elders, what we're going to do is pause these conversations and move into encouraging us into the learning communities, because that's going to be really effective. And then we will have an Elders Day at some point in the new year. And so thank you for joining and being part of these conversations. And I'm going to let the video from Carl run, which will explain more about the learning communities.
Hey everyone, in September 2022, we are really excited to launch our first Metropolitan Region Learning Community. We're going to be calling together Elim churches and Elim leaders from across the Met regions into an intentional learning space. We cannot wait. Right now, we believe lots of church leaders are asking the question, what does church health look like? What does fruitfulness look like? How do I lead towards health and fruitfulness? We believe this learning community is going to create space for us to come and to learn, to discuss, to plan and commit. And we get to track alongside other churches as we do it. We're going to be calling senior leaders to come and to attend this along with members of their team. And over 9 months, we're going to meet on 6 different occasions, from a Friday evening to a Saturday afternoon, and we're going to dive into some really big subjects together. We're going to look at how do we know our vision? What about pastoral care and small groups? What about investing in the next generation, as well as creating a culture of worship, prayer, and the prophetic? We believe that these are some areas that we are all want to be intentional about. And to lead into health, to lead into fruitfulness, we have to be intentional. So I want to encourage you to come and to be part of this learning community journey. Come and learn from others, journey alongside one another, but also alongside your leadership teams. There is more information available. If you don't have that, drop us an email at info@elimmetro.com and we'll be able to send you all the information you need about the learning community, which launches this September. We cannot wait to journey alongside you.